sultry, stormy, frigid Winnipeg, although it's quiet on the streets. I call this meeting to order and welcome to meeting number 4 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. And so you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. I have a long list of protocols, public health protocols that I read before every meeting. Can I have permission of the committee to dispense reading them all verbatim? Good. Except to say that when you're speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members should be addressed through the chair. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk will advise the chair on whose hands are up to the best of his ability, and we will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Colleagues, we now move to committee business. Your subcommittee met last week to consider the business of the committee and agree on a number of items. You all received by email a copy of the first report of the subcommittee on agenda and procedure. As mentioned in the report, the analysts prepared a work plan that included 1-hour panels of 3 witnesses in order of priority, which was distributed to all members. Does the committee wish to adopt the report?
I so move.
I see thumbs up everywhere. The subcommittee report is adopted. And I would like to ask the committee to consider the adoption of a budget for the study of gun control, illegal arms trafficking, and the increase in gun crimes committed by members of street gangs. You have all received it by mail. It covers costs related to our meetings. Do I have an agreement on the budget? Yes, I do. Thank you, everybody. Pursuant to the order adopted by the House of Commons on Tuesday, December 7th, 2021, the committee is resuming its study of gun control, illegal arms trafficking, and the increase in gun crimes committed by members of street gangs. With us today by video conference from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Michael Duhem, Deputy Commissioner, Federal Policing, Stephen White, Deputy Commissioner, Specialized Policing Services, Michel Arquin, Assistant Commissioner, Federal Policing Criminal Operations, Dawn Helena, Director General, National Forensic Laboratory Services, and Kelly Paquette, Director General. From the Canada Border Services Agency, Fred Gaspar, Vice President, Commercial and Trade Branch, and Scott Harris, Vice President, Intelligence and Enforcement Branch. From the Customs and Immigration Union, Mark Weber, National President, and from the National Police Federation, Brian Sauvé, President. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks from each of these organizations, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Welcome to you all. I now invite the RCMP to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Mr. le Président, membres du comité, bonjour. My name is Stephen White, Deputy Commissioner for Specialized Policing Services. As was just mentioned, I'm joined today by Michael Duhem, Deputy Commissioner, Federal Policing, Assistant Commissioner Michel Arquin, From Federal Policing, Director General Kelly Paquette from the Canadian Firearms Program, and Chief Superintendent Don Helena from National Forensic Laboratory Services. It is our pleasure to address you today and explain what actions the RCMP is taking to address gun and gang violence, including the smuggling and trafficking of firearms. Like all Canadians, we're deeply troubled by the impact of gun and gang violence on Canadians and on our communities across the country. Reducing this violence is therefore not only a priority for the RCMP in the communities and areas that we serve, but also more broadly across the country as we provide critical frontline operational services to law enforcement agencies across Canada to aid their efforts to tackle gun and gang violence. À cet égard, le mandat de la GRC en matière de...
In this regard, the RCMP's mandate when it comes to gun violence, counterband, and gun trafficking is both global and complementary.
Every day, the Canadian Firearms Program, the RCMP's Forensic Laboratories, Criminal Intelligence Service Canada, CISC, and our Federal Policing Program work collaboratively and with law enforcement agencies right across the country, including where the RCMP serves as police of jurisdiction and internationally to support the identification, arrest, and prosecution of criminals and criminal groups that seek to commit gun and gang-related crime. From the CFP's Canadian National Firearms Tracing Center and its firearms technical and enforcement experts that aid investigations and the prosecution of persons and groups involved in the criminal use of firearms, to the forensic laboratory's ability to restore serial numbers that aid tracing efforts, as well as link seemingly unrelated criminal cases to a single firearm, to CISC's intelligence holdings, where unknown or suspected criminals and criminal groups involved in serious or organized crime that are accessible to over 380 federal, provincial, and municipal law enforcement and public safety members across Canada. And federal policing's efforts to target transnational organized crime networks that exploit our borders, including firearms smuggling. The RCMP continues to help address gun and gang violence across Canada and the illegal movement of firearms into our country, alongside our federal, provincial, municipal, and international partners, including the CBSA. La GRC collabore avec bon nombre.
The RCMP cooperates with many Aboriginal communities and along the border in order to help them fight organized crime, firearm counterband, and other illicit activities. This partnership helps us.
We're not getting translations.
Point of order, I'm getting it. You're not.
I'm not, no.
Okay. Clerk, we have a translation issue.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the French and the English were at the same volume. It was hard to hear one language over the other.
How about other members? Were you getting translation, but it was garbled?
I was also getting it the same as Mr. McGregor was just saying, English and French at the same time.
Uh-huh.
I was getting the floor in French, but also the translation coming through in French. So, and I've set it out as English on my Zoom. So maybe just try again, and we'll maybe it's been sorted out.
Okay, well, let's keep going, and members will let me know if there's still a problem, and then we'll pause until it's been corrected. So please proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can I just suggest, if I may, to the witnesses to select the floor option when they speak, and not the English or French?
You mean in the interpretation icon, you have three choices: floor, English, or French. The clerk is suggesting you have it on floor.
That's correct.
Okay.
Please proceed.
Proceed, sir.
Thank you. Ces partenariats.
These successful partnerships have contributed to the targeting of criminal networks that exploit the Canada-US border to smuggle illegal commodities.
Law enforcement partners to combat cross-border threats, including firearms smuggling, through several well-established operational partnerships. While at the strategic level, the RCMP is a member of the Canada-US Cross-Border Firearms Task Force announced earlier this year. CBSA is leading efforts for the Canadian side of this task force, and the RCMP will be at the table. Taking part in this initiative will assist the RCMP in pursuing criminal investigations in partnership with our U.S. law enforcement partners that involve cross-border smuggling. A recent example of our efforts was on November 26, 2021, when members of the integrated RCMP Cornwall Border Integrity Team, working with several domestic partners, seized 53 restricted and prohibited pistols, 6 prohibited rifles, and 110 high-capacity magazines. It is believed these firearms were destined for criminal networks and illicit gun trafficking groups. The RCMP is also benefiting from recent investments to enhance our ability to tackle gun and gang violence and firearm smuggling. Beginning in 2018-19, the RCMP is receiving $34.5 million over 5 years to expand the services available to law enforcement by enhancing several capabilities to better combat the use of illegal firearms and improve the national collection, analysis, and sharing of firearms-related intelligence and information. Further, the RCMP is providing specialized training to law enforcement agencies on firearms identification, regulatory requirements, as well as new technologies and emerging trends in firearms trafficking and illicit manufacturing. Additionally,
would you please start to wind down, please, Mr. White?
Yes, almost finished, Mr. Chair. Additionally, in beginning this fiscal year, the RCMP will receive $40.3 million over 5 years and $5.5 million ongoing to address firearm smuggling, including investments to support CISC's new Canadian Criminal Intelligence System that will help all law enforcement in Canada to target and disrupt criminal activity. As well, the RCMP will further receive an investment beginning this fiscal year of $15 million over 5 years to increase our capacity to trace firearms and identify the movement of illegal firearms into and within Canada. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be with you today, and we welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. And now I would invite the CBSC to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président et membres du Comité permanent.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. I thank you for your invitation. I am Scott Harris, Vice President of the Intelligence and Enforcement Branch, and I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the President to respond to your questions about the significant steps of CBSA is taking to prevent illegal weapons from entering Canada.
Gaspar, Vice President of Commercial and Trade. The CBSA ensures compliance with existing laws, regulations, and orders, including the Customs Act, the Firearms Act, and the Criminal Code, and any and all of the laws that prohibit, control, and regulate the importation of goods into Canada. In these efforts, CBSA works closely with other law enforcement agencies such as the RCMP, and with the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, U.S. Homeland Security, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection. My organization also stays current on global trends and patterns to ensure Border Service officers know about new concealment methods. Officers use a variety of detection tools, techniques, and the latest scientific technology to prevent contraband from entering Canada. In 2018, the government provided CBSA with $51.5 million over 5 years, with $7.5 million ongoing to enhance its capacity to take action on guns and gang violence. This funding has allowed the agency to increase its operational capacity to screen passengers and examine commercial shipments for all contraband, including illegal firearms. The CBSA firearms strategy focuses on identifying criminal networks and trafficking routes in order to prevent illicit firearms from crossing the border and to disrupt the smuggling done by criminal networks. It's heavily focused on partnerships involving law enforcement partners, both domestically and abroad, to keep our communities safe. In 2021, the CBSA National Firearms Desk was established. This desk brings together CBSA partners working to combat firearms smuggling in order to maintain a real-time national border-focused threat picture of illicit firearms in Canada and their movements across our borders. Our efforts have been paying off. In 2021, over 1,000 firearms and firearm parts were confiscated in 409 seizures. Included in this count are 233 seizures in Ontario, 88 in BC, and 21 in Quebec. An exemple de l'importance.
One example is the important work being done by the CBSA with its counterparts in the province of Quebec. The CBSA's Quebec region also works closely with various law enforcement partners across the province to further investigations into illegal cross-border firearms movements. In February 2021, the arrest by the RCMP of a resident of L'Ancienne Lorette, Quebec, along with the seizure of homemade bombs, firearms, silencers, magazines, volumes of ammunition, and prohibited weapons, resulted from an initial CBSA intercept and seizure of a prohibited silencer being illegally imported into Canada.
Officers exercise their professional judgment in a highly complex environment and are well supported in their training to apply these measures. I'm very proud of the work of CBSA staff and the work that they have done and will continue to do to protect Canadians from the scourge of illegal firearms and their detrimental effects on our communities. Je me ferai au plaisir de répondre.
I will be happy to answer questions from committee members about what we are seeing in an operational and implementation space on this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Now, could I call upon Mr. Weber and invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you here today. My name is Mark Weber. I'm the National President of the Customs and Immigration Union, which represents personnel working for the CBSA. CIU has a long history of involvement in border security issues on behalf of its members, and we're pleased to participate in this panel. Regarding the matter at hand, I'd like to bring to the committee's attention 3 areas of particular importance within the scope of border operations. 1, longstanding and widespread understaffing at the CBSA. 2, important operational gaps impacting highway, marine, and rail modes. And 3, the pressing need for increased reliance on CBSA officers' unique expertise, including between ports of entry. Since the implementation of the 2011 Deficit Reduction Action Plan, DRAP, which resulted in a loss of more than 1,000 positions at the CBSA, CIU has been vocal about the plan's negative impact on overall operational capabilities. Most ports of entry are chronically understaffed and officers overworked. With few officers present on the front lines, we believe that our ability to effectively intercept smuggled goods, such as illegal firearms, has been severely affected. While in recent years, the agency has expressed its desire to boost recruiting numbers, the situation endures, weakening Canada's border control. Recently, we've seen the agency commit to a number of initiatives in response to the challenges posed by illegal firearms, including an increased number of detector dog teams, new mobile examination vehicles, equipment, etc. And while this is all very positive, it must go hand in hand with adequate staffing numbers. Technology must be used to assist and not to replace our actual presence in the field. Beyond staffing problems, there are glaring issues in several modes of operation at the border, which, in the union's opinion, severely undermine Canada's ability to control the flow of illegal firearms. At the highway level, many CBSA locations have limited hours of operation. CBSA officers are also restricted in their ability to act outside of ports of entry and must rely on other agencies, mainly the RCMP, to address issues related to so-called port runners or other criminal activities occurring in between ports. This slows down our general ability to react in a timely fashion to problematic situations, and it weakens the integrity of our border. More generally speaking, everything just shut down on me. I have a black screen. Just a moment.
We can hear you just fine.
Yeah, everything's gone.
We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay.
So I would suggest you just proceed.
Keep speaking. Okay. At the marine level, overall reporting infrastructure is both insufficient and outdated. Once again, officers lack the necessary tools and authority to intervene, impacting their ability to intercept dangerous goods. Perhaps most glaring of all are the rail mode operations, where, according to the union's own data as of 2019, only 1/1,000,000th of all rail cargo was effectively being examined. The reality is that our current operational abilities in the rail field are virtually non-existent. Canada has almost zero examination capabilities directly at the border, due in part to geographical issues, inadequate tools, and political decisions not to force rail carriers to supply the necessary facilities. In other words, there's almost a 0% chance that any illegal weapons entering the country via rail will ever be found. All these operational gaps find themselves compounded by the aforementioned staffing shortages. The message is clear: as things stand, not only is Canada's ability to prevent smuggling lacking, but its capacity to gather reliable and sound data is also inadequate. In our view, if the government of Canada is serious in addressing the problem of illegal firearms smuggled across the border, the mandate of our border officers must be expanded so as to assist in patrolling between crossings. It's a well-known fact that the border between Canada and our neighbors to the south is the longest undefended border in the world. And while this is certainly a testament to the good relations between our countries, it also comes with its own unique set of security challenges. To mitigate these, we invite the Government of Canada to empower its CBSA officers to further help curb smuggling activities into Canada from land or sea routes, including between ports of entry. Ultimately, we'd like to see the CBSA upper echelons more effectively rely on our members' unique expertise in the field of border security when it comes to policy decisions. Too often will management take a course of action that either does not take into account or blatantly disregards the realities in the field. We believe this could often be corrected through meaningful consultation with and effective involvement of our members. We all have a stake in protecting our communities from harm, and that includes gun violence. In conclusion, it's my hope that the union's input will assist the committee in this important work. I thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Congratulations, Mr. Weber. You were 5 minutes to the second. It's an example for everybody.
Thank you.
Mr. Sauvé, I now invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, including right on the schnoz. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Apologize for the delay. You have an excellent IT department, which got me in. Thank you for inviting me to appear today. I'm Brian Sauvé, President of the National Police Federation, sole certified bargaining agent representing close to 20,000 members of the RCMP across Canada and internationally. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. In 2020, StatsCan reported over 3,500 firearms offenses, a 15% increase over 2019 and 84% greater than 2010. Canada has long prided itself as a safe, nonviolent country, but firearms offenses and gang-related violence are on the rise. Although nationwide data still must be collected, it is the experience of law enforcement that most of these guns are illegally obtained. For example, 3 of the firearms used during the April 2020 mass shooting in Nova Scotia that killed 22 people were illegally acquired from the United States. Unfortunately, there's no easy fix to gun violence, and we need enough resources and dedicated units to lead investigations focused on curbing illegal activities. Today, I'll address 3 aspects related to gun crimes, with more detail on our recommendations in our submission. First, we must address the RCMP's human and financial recruitment challenges. The RCMP plays an integral role in preventing gun violence, working alongside other agencies like the CBSA and our municipal and provincial police counterparts. Over the past number of years, the RCMP has experienced new challenges such as staffing levels, recruitment, and member well-being. All areas of policing, though, have experienced a significant increase in demand for services beyond crime prevention and law enforcement. Illegal firearms, gun crimes, and violence remain top priorities for police, but to effectively address these issues, both police and social services need increased resources. Second, the federal government should develop a national operational investigative program for illegal firearms smuggling. A unified program offering support, control, and investigative tools to curb illegal firearms in Canada, concentrated in one place. Evidence-based firearms controls are vital to ensuring that the ownership and use of firearms is as safe as possible. Resources should prioritize the criminal use of firearms with a coordinated strategy that effectively combines prevention, law enforcement, and social programs. This program could also tackle gun smuggling. While border integrity teams work to intercept illegal firearms, current programs like the National Weapons Enforcement Support Team, seize hundreds of illegal firearms annually, but must be fully supported to tackle the flow of illegal guns across the border. The 2018 federal budget invested $327 million over 5 years to establish the initiative to take action against gun and gang violence. Of that, $34.5 million went to the RCMP to support the new Integrated Criminal Firearms Initiative. And we welcome this investment, but these initiatives will only be successful with proper funding to investigative units that focus on gun smuggling. Third, we must understand the link between gang violence and criminality. Budget 2018 also allocated $214 million over 5 years to provinces to combat gun and gang violence. And our RCMP members work tirelessly to counteract gang recruitment, one example being the Surrey RCMP's Shattering the Image anti-gang program, which has proven quite successful. However, new funding and resources are still needed to expand existing programs and launch successful models in other regions. As gun-related crime increases, the NPF encourages this committee to review the results of these initiatives and build a strategy to address and fund similar programs. Community programs, along with law enforcement, should be evidence-based and results-oriented. The 2018 Summit on Gun and Gang Violence concluded that a holistic approach to these issues is needed, and we agree. Addressing gang violence needs a committed, well-funded, multi-pronged approach that includes community programs. At the same time, vulnerable communities also require protection from violent criminals, and well-resourced, well-conducted investigations along with sentencing will help drive deterrence. The government must address these issues and work in partnership with the RCMP and other agencies to develop adequate and efficient programs to guarantee the safety of all Canadians. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Sauvé, you were on the top. Perfect. Holy smokes. If all witnesses and all members were as punctual as this, life would be an easier place. Okay, I would now like to open the floor to questions just for the interest of our guests, witnesses. We have a number of rounds. This is all predetermined by consensus of members of the committee. The first round is of 6 minutes each from each of the parties represented. And I would like to start by giving the floor over to Ms. Dancho. Ms. Dancho, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank very sincerely all the hard work all the witnesses have been doing over the last number of years to keep Canadians safe. We're certainly depending on you. And with the rise of violent crime and gun violence and gang violence and drug deaths related to drug trafficking, Conservatives are extremely concerned that the trajectory is going in much the wrong direction, despite the tremendous efforts by all of your agencies and unions and the members of your unions. From the testimonies, what I'm hearing overall is that the problem, certainly with the rise of gang violence and gun crime, is from gangs, which we know is deeply driven by drug trafficking. And we also heard a significant amount of testimony about the problem of gun smuggling across the border. So for Mr. White, in your opening remarks, you talked quite a bit about this. You mentioned, gun and gang violence, quite interrelated, it sounded from your remarks. So can you just confirm again that gang violence is largely driven by drug trafficking, and it is gang violence that is the primary contributor of gun violence in Canada?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. Our intelligence, and investigative work clearly indicates that one of the primary activities of street gangs is drug trafficking. Recent CISC work with regards to looking at street gangs. They estimate there's over 400 street gangs operating in Canada. The vast majority of them use violence to further their criminal activities, and a lot of their activities are very high visibility crimes, like shootings, and some of the main activities are drug trafficking, and it branches out as well to human trafficking, sex trade offenses as well.
Yes, thank you very much. And what recommendations have you made to the government to combat these issues that you've just outlined? I'm sure you've made many, so if you can be concise, that would be great.
Yeah, no, we're always working very closely with our government partners to try to identify new initiatives, activities that can help combat. I mean, some of the things that we are currently highlighting in terms of gangs and firearms violence is to increase the tracing of firearms and much more robust intelligence sharing. And we, across all police services right across country, those two things are critical. Tracing, we are receiving some additional funding and resources to enhance our activities in that regard as well. We just recently received funding to build a new Canadian Criminal Intelligence Services that is going to be used by all police services across Canada to, first of all, develop much more robust intelligence and be able to share that in a much more modern and effective way.
Oh, great, thank you very much. And my understanding is Ontario is the only province that's actually legislated that all firearms obtained in violent crimes need to be traced. Is that the case?
To my knowledge, yes. I'm not sure if there are others. I mean, I think every province to some degree is, has a significant interest in tracing firearms. The reality is the number of firearms that were seized last year across the country, over well over 30,000. We actually, the National Tracing Center under the Canadian Firearms Program, we actually traced just a very small percentage of those handguns, so and other firearms.
Right. And my understanding is in the other provinces outside of Ontario, they will trace it if it's relevant to solving the case, but police resources are very strapped, as many individuals, many witnesses have outlined already today. So it seems that it's something they'll do if they have to. But as you mentioned, tracing seems to be a critical part of determining where these firearms come from that commit the violent crimes in Canada. Would you say that tracing, and how long does that take? I mean, for outsiders, we're not even really sure what that means, and that's through the RCMP lab. Is that correct?
Actually, that's through the Canadian Tracing Center under the
Yes,
Canadian Firearms Program. It depends. The Tracing Center, they try to go back as far as they can with regards to a firearm, right back, if they can, to the manufacturer, to the distributor. If it's American firearms, distribution in the US, if it went from a retailer in the US, all the way up into possibly how it entered Canada, if it entered legally, if it was distributed to retailers in Canada, from the retailer in Canada, possibly to owners. So it can be, I would say, and I think I said it previously, it can be a complex process depending on how far you're able to go back and trace.
Right. And so when you trace them to, you mentioned the United States, is from what we understand, again, how almost every testimony is talking about gun smuggling from the US. So it would seem that if we can trace the guns there, then we can better collaborate with our American counterparts. But my understanding is it takes a lot of resources and many, many days, upwards of even 200 days to properly trace a firearm, and not all are being traced. So would you say more resources from the federal government specifically for tracing of firearms would help and be more effective in ultimately solving the issue of gun violence from gang activity in Canada?
Yeah, no, absolutely. As I mentioned, we did just recently receive some additional funding for tracing, so we're going to add some additional resources to the Tracing Center. But in terms of overall, in terms of, impact on guns and gangs, tracing provides, potential evidence on the sources of the specific crime guns. It also develops very strategic and tactical intelligence. And it's that strategic intelligence that really provides understanding of sources of illegal firearms, as well as patterns related to type and make, as well as possible smuggling and trafficking routes and intelligence. But to be able to do that, you've got to trace a large number of guns to develop those trends and those patterns and try to identify those specific locations, which are preferred locations for smuggling.
Thank you very much, Mr. White, and thank you, Ms. Dansha. Mr. McKinnon, over to you for 6 minutes, more or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with Mr. Weber. Mr. Weber, you mentioned that you referred to the deficit reduction plan in 2011 as one of the consequences or one of the causes of staff reductions, and indicated staff reductions, staffing levels are one of the particular problems with interdiction of arms at the border. So I note that since we took office in 2015, we've added 600 full-time equivalent positions. So I'm wondering if that has helped the matter. And further to that, how much more do you think is required?
Thank you very much for your question. The numbers that are being added, as far as we can tell, are covering attrition. So the actual overall number of frontline officers is not currently going up. We still have several ports that are running pretty much predominantly on overtime. Places like Windsor, it's almost unlimited. Lac Hall, with what they have to process with the asylum seekers coming across Roxham Road. We're actually sending officers there from across the country to just help with the volume. So staffing wise, if you're asking me how many more do you think would help, I think an extra 1,000 officers would be a good place to start. That would be a realistic number. I think there's work that could be done in terms of how hiring at the CBSA is done as well. It used to be a 9-week program. The recruits were paid and they were hired within their own region. They've changed that to a national program where they're not paid, and recruits are, once they finish the program, sent all over the country. So that greatly reduces the pool of candidates. You see many quitting during the program or shortly after. And it creates a system where once their 1 year of apprenticeship is up, a good percentage of these officers then have to try to get back to where they were from. It's a system that seems to be designed to drag things out as long as possible and get officers working in places that they don't really want to be. So I think that's an obvious and easy way where we can help our staffing.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. I'm going to segue to the RCMP. Mr. White or other members of the RCMP. Commissioner Lucky, when she appeared before this committee in, I believe it was December, indicated, I believe, 73% of firearms used in violent incidents were deemed sourced within Canada and 27 were smuggled. So I think the bulk of those being domestically sourced. I'm wondering if we could drill down a bit more into where those firearms are coming from domestically. Are they straw purchases? Are they thefts of legally acquired weapons? Or perhaps you could speak to that for a bit.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for your question. I would just reiterate what, from the previous committee meeting, what was discussed. So of the over 30,000 firearms that were seized last year in 2020, we received tracing requests for 2,094. We're able to successfully trace 1,472. So 73% of those were deemed to be imported legally or manufactured in Canada, and 27%, as you mentioned, were smuggled or possibly smuggled. Of the 1,472, 71% were long guns. And of these, 85% were domestically sourced, and 29% of these were handguns, and 58% of those handguns were identified as smuggled, possibly smuggled. Now, I don't have any further details with me. I guess if you're asking in terms of were they traced back to particular provinces, I would assume that the largest populations in Canada by city is where most of the handguns, for example, are seized. So I would think most of them would be traced back to those locations.
I guess what I'm looking for with the 73% is how did they get into the hands of people who are committing these offenses? Are they in the hands of people who have acquired them legally, or are they stolen weapons, or people who have bought them from a straw purchaser? If you could give us some indication, if you have that kind of information.
Yeah. Obviously, the majority of them were long guns, handguns, long guns, rifles. So a lot of them, depending on the nature, you have to go back to the source of the investigation. A lot of them could be legally purchased and acquired and used in a crime. Some of them could be straw purchases. Some of them could be lost or stolen firearms that were subsequently obtained and used in criminal activity. Unfortunately, I don't think we have those stats as part of the tracing center, but I would invite Kelly Paquette, the Director General of the Firearms Program, if she has anything additional to add.
Please go ahead.
No, I don't have anything to add except possibly that we're looking at the national picture, but if you start looking at each province, like you've indicated, you'll see different variations of how many of those are lost or stolen or smuggled. But we are seeing all of the above happening, as Mr. White indicated.
Thank you.
Hey,
So,
Mr. McKinnon, how do you want to use your last 5 seconds?
oh, I think I'll give it back to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Then right over to Ms. Michaud for your 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux témoins pour votre présence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for their presence. We're very pleased to hear your comments because we're very concerned about this topic. Mr. Weber, you really put your finger on the problem, notably within the border agency. You talked about a lack of resources, overwork. You answered my colleague's question by saying that we need about 1,000 extra officers. Could they be hired? Or is there a lack of means to do so? Is there a worker shortage? Is there just not enough officers out there? Or can we not hire them, in your opinion? Thank you for the question. Given the complexity of the topic, I will answer in English in order to be as precise as possible.
I mean, in terms financially, whether the CBSA has the ability to hire 1,000 more officers would not be for me to answer. What I can say is that the system of hiring that's in place now is very different from what it was a few years ago, and it makes it much harder to get those recruits through the program. They've doubled the length of the program. Recruits are no longer paid to go through the program. Recruits, rather than going back to the region they were hired from, are now sent anywhere across the country to eventually then try to get deployed back to where it is they came from. So, you know, when you present that to someone as a career path, come work for me for free for 18 weeks, and you'll have a job and we're going to send you anywhere we want to across the country, it's far less attractive than when it was previously. And it's all that extra time to get them through to be full border services officers and be able to be on the ground and working, right?
Merci. Je suivais un peu.
Thank you. I was following this issue recently, and I saw an interview in which you were proposing many solutions, notably broadening the mandate of border officers. The fact that they can't get out of ports of entry is a problem, apparently, and that could be improved and could help seize more firearms. In 2020, you had written to Mr. Blair, who was Minister of Public Safety at the time, proposing the creation of a special border patrol. It made me think of the Bloc Québécois suggestion made to the government a few weeks ago to really create a special squad or partnership between various organizations that can work together to seize more firearms. Is that a proposal that's similar, in your opinion? Did you get any answer from Mr. Blair?
Thank you for the question. No, we've not gotten an answer, and you've identified a lot of the concerns that we brought up as well. If I could provide an example of port runners currently, if someone drives through the port, we have no ability to stop them. All we do is call the police, and hopefully the police apprehend them somewhere down the road. Those are simple things that would take simple legislative changes to allow us to actually, affect change and stop that kind of smuggling from happening. In terms of patrolling between our ports of entry, our understanding really is that the interdiction to patrolling between the POEs is based on a 1932 order in council, and that it's only really minor amendments to the existing legislation that would make it possible for us to do that. The point that we're trying to bring across is that, the men and women who do this work all day, every day, all they do is try to find smuggling. They're the experts. They know how it's done. They've seen it hidden in any manner you can imagine. But that's simply not being used between ports, right? So we think that's a real waste of resources in a way.
En effet, ça semble assez évident.
Indeed, that seems quite obvious. You were talking about marine or rail infrastructure too, which is either non-existent or completely overwhelmed. Do you feel that you have the government's support to provide those patrols or to do more work there? Or does the government not seem very aware that it could help to have more resources at the marine and rail levels?
I can't speak for them. I'm hoping my presence here will help with that awareness. We have significant gaps, I would say, in rail, likely more than anywhere else. Currently, we don't really have rail examination capabilities at first port of arrival in Canada. Trains that, for instance, used to be looked at in Fort Frances, Ontario, coming into Canada, now they're being looked at 400 kilometers away in Winnipeg, which means a train enters Canada and then travels over 400 kilometers unfenced and unsecured to get to somewhere in Winnipeg, where even there we don't really have the facilities to do a full search, and we usually don't do the search anyway. Many locations are not conducting any kind of cargo screening for rail. Most locations don't even do complete crew reporting. In Fort Frances right now, there's over $1 million in AMPs. We call them AMPs, administrative monetary penalties, are right now sitting on a manager's desk and they're not being applied. The latitude given to rail carriers we find is far and above anything that's given to any other kind of industry, trucking, air. The CBSA has not forced rail carriers to provide rail inspection facilities at the first point of arrival. This despite their legal ability to do so under Section 6 of the Customs Act. That's really the same act that enforces private bridge operators to build CBSA offices if they want to operate a crossing. The CBSA enforces it there, but with rail, it doesn't seem that anything is being enforced right now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber, and thank you, Ms. Michaud. I'd like now to turn to Mr. McGregor for his 6-minute slot. The floor, sir, is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you to our witnesses for aiding our committee in this important study on firearms and their trafficking. I'd like to start with the RCMP, and this is sort of following with the line of questioning that Ms. Dancho had on the Canadian National Firearms Tracing Center. So it does exist to process requests that can assist national and international law enforcement agencies in their investigations. And there has been some discussion about the resources that tracing center has. I guess I'm wondering, Mr. White, seeing as you're in a virtual room here with policymakers, is there anything else required from a regulatory standpoint or a legislative standpoint on strengthening the tracing center and maybe bringing stuff this subject a little bit more strongly under a federal wheelhouse, if you will?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for your question. It is a very important issue, and we are working towards that. We've engaged with the CACP, the firearms subcommittee of the CACP, to start having those discussions. We're getting great support from them to hopefully initiate across the country with police services, education and awareness, the importance of tracing firearms, to really try to significantly increase the number of firearms that are coming in for tracing, especially all of the firearms that are seized, or if it's not moving forward for prosecution, and it may have some valuable intelligence with regards to criminal activity, even getting all of those firearms in for tracing as well would be very beneficial. And that goes right to the same with, and I'll use this because we have our one of our experts today from the labs, but firearms cartridge casing. So you may have a shooting in a particular city or location, anywhere in the country, no victims, no suspects identified, but police do recover cartridges from that shooting. Send those in so we can do the same thing and try to examine, assess, and possibly trace those cartridges to other shootings across the country. So think of the intelligence. If you recently had a gang shooting in Toronto, you've got a cartridge from that shooting, you don't have the firearm, you upload that into our ballistic system through the forensic laboratory systems. You get another shooting a month later out in BC, another cartridge casing, no firearms, upload that, you get a match between those cartridges. That starts building really, really good intelligence that a gang shooting in Toronto, gang shooting in BC with the same firearms, obviously now you got linkages between those two provinces. So more tracing of the firearms that are seized, more tracing of the assessments and analysis of the cartridges that are seized from shooting scenes as well.
Thank you for that information. On the subject of cartridges and ammunition in general, I mean, we've been talking a lot about firearms, and you know, I've seen in the news lately that some people have become quite innovative and are starting to 3D print firearms components to put them together. You know, a firearm is a relatively simple device to put together. You need to devise something that can strike a cartridge to fire a bullet. Can you tell the committee a little bit more about the smuggling of ammunition and you know, what your efforts have been like in that regard specifically?
Yeah, we have had seizures of ammunition. I think in my opening comments, one of the seizure I did referred to ammunition, but I would I'll pass it to Deputy Commissioner Mike Zuem and Assistant Commissioner Michelle Arcan if they can comment on some of the seizures that they are doing from federal policing at the border with the border integrity teams if they are seizing amounts of ammunition.
Thank you, Steve. Sir, just to come back to some of the questions, the detecting source of illegal firearms is difficult given clandestine nature. We don't seize everything that's coming between the ports of entry. And when we're talking about firearms, I'd like to widen that to other pieces that are attached to the firearms, like an extended mag, which is illegal in Canada. We've been seeing far more imports on silencers that originate from China that people are ordering. It's also prohibited. And to your question with regards to the 3D printer, owning a 3D printer, to my knowledge, is not illegal. But we have, on searches in Quebec for sure, come across people who, with the 3D printer, have printed the bottom part of the handgun. So it is a concern. There's no legislation around 3D printer because it could be used for many use. But we are seeing an increase in silencers, and we are seeing an increase in fabricated pieces of weapon by 3D printer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And did you have like anything else to add with regards to the ammunition piece as well? I only have about 20 seconds left, so.
The only thing I can add, sir, is within 20 seconds, is that there's several searches that we've done over the past year that we've seized a considerable amount of ammo stored at certain individuals. Again, you buy a box of ammo here, a box of ammo there, then eventually you start building up, which is also difficult, I think, to control.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you both very much for being so attentive to our time. That's the end of the first round. We move right away into the second round of questioning. And for our guests, it'll either be 5 minutes or 2.5 minutes, depending on the party. It all starts with Mr. Van Popta, who has 5 minutes. Sir, the floor is yours.
Good. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being with us here today to help us through this very important study, to help us parliamentarians develop good policies to keep Canadians safer. I'm going to start with Mr. Weber. Thank you for giving your evidence. If you were given the opportunity to reallocate the resources that you already have, what steps would you propose in the immediate future to come up with some solutions that would be helpful for you and your members to do your work more effectively? And I'm thinking particularly at land border crossings.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Definitely more people would be needed at land border crossings. Like I said, we have borders that operate well, they couldn't operate without overtime. I think rail operations where we have really no ability to do any kind of searches at our borders, I think the infrastructure would have to be built along with putting people there to actually work it. Another solution be to looking at having us use the facilities that are available on the US side to do that work if they would allow us to do that. Those would be the two main places that I would start, though. I would say Marine as well could probably use a boost staff-wise, and there'd have to be some money spent on upgrading the telephone reporting systems, which are outdated, a lot of them in areas where even if someone were to report and we wanted to see them, they are hours away from anywhere where we could get to them, to the point where we're not actually going to go out and see them, which begs the question, why do you have a telephone reporting center there? I think that kind of infrastructure work would have to be done along with adding in personnel.
I was quite disturbed with your comments about inability to inspect rail trains as they come across land border crossings. I think you were saying that 0%, basically nothing. There's no investigations done at all. What's the solution there? Are we looking for better technology for automated inspections, or is it just more human resources?
More human resources and building the infrastructure to allow us to do those searches. Currently at most crossings in Canada, there's nothing there for us to do the search. We have to take the car off. It's more than just opening the door and having a peek inside. So it's quite a bit of work to get that done. It's unfortunate that this has not happened before now, but it's something that our members have been highlighting to the CBSA for many, many years. I mean, we have people who target rail and they know that their targets will never get to anywhere because the car is not actually going to be opened and looked into, right? It's all about getting data. You know, if you look at it, gathering data is the looking. Gathering data has been crucial throughout the 2 years of COVID. The gathering of information has been essential in getting a clear picture of the extent of the pandemic. Testing less would have only resulted in being ignorant of the full extent of the problem, perhaps wrongly assuming that it was not as widespread. I look at testing like searching. If we're not looking, we're not going to find. And if you don't look, you don't really know what the extent of the problem is. We need people to actually be looking and searching.
Good, thank you for that. You had made reference to CBSA officers' inability to inspect between border crossings, and that you rely on the RCMP for that. Perhaps you could expand on that a little bit. You know, is this something that your members would like to take on if they had the resources available? And that, of course, leads to another human resources challenge. You don't have the people to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a role that we would like to participate in. We're not saying participate in it to the exclusion of the RCMP, but participate more than we are doing so now. Our involvement is very little. I could say in marine mode, even when we're invited out with the RCMP, the CBSA's response is no, you're not going. The attitude seems to be very much that you are to sit at your port of entry, and anything outside of there is not your problem. Phone someone. I don't think that's a way to run a border. We're the Canada Border Services Agency. I think morale-wise, you can't imagine what it does to our members to see a car fly through and be able to do absolutely nothing but make a phone call. That's our border and we protect it. I don't think that's the right way to go about it.
Good, thank you.
You've got 10 seconds. How would you like to use them, Mr.
Well,
Van
I'm going to
Putten?
use those 10 seconds to thank the witnesses once again for coming here and sharing their wisdom with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I would like to thank them too. Now we go to Ms. Demoff, who has 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Chair. And thanks to all the witnesses for your testimony, for your hard work, and for your very practical suggestions that you've already given to our committee. I have a couple of fairly straightforward questions for the RCMP. The first one is, how many handguns are currently in circulation, and how many individuals have a license to own a handgun? I know those two will be very different.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. Currently, approximately 2.2 million individuals currently hold a valid firearms license. and approximately 4,100 businesses are licensed in Canada. In terms of the number of firearms, we
No,
have
the handguns.
Yep, I'll
Okay.
add that in. But just in overall firearms, we have a total of approximately 1.1 million registered firearms, and 96.7% of them are handguns. So basically, approximately 1 million handguns are registered in Canada. And the ownership of that, I'm thinking approximately 275,000 owners own those 1 million registered handguns, but I will defer to Ms. Paquette to confirm that.
You are correct. 276,000.
That's great. Thank you. One of I worked on Bill C-71 at committee, and prior to Christmas, we passed a motion to refer the regulations back to have them come into force. And one of the things was that it would require someone selling firearms to check that the person purchasing had a license. It was something I was actually quite shocked we weren't already doing. So I wonder if you can confirm with me that these regulations that we've put in place require someone selling those firearms to have a valid license. So if you could just confirm that for me.
Yes, that is correct. The seller of one of those firearms must verify that the person they are selling to has a valid
Okay, so the regulations as they're worded uses that they must check?
Yes, I'm thinking I'll just ask Kelly to confirm that.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and what happens if a seller doesn't check and is selling the firearms to?
It's an illegal sale.
Okay. One of the things that I was quite concerned about when I met with the Danforth families was that the firearm used in that shooting was, while it was illegal, it had started out as a legal firearm in Saskatchewan. So, but they told me that the magazine purchased for that firearm was legally purchased in Durham region. Do you require a license to buy a magazine for a firearm?
No.
Okay, and you do not need a license, sorry, you need a license to buy ammunition, but you do not need a license to possess ammunition. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, awesome. That's very helpful. Can you confirm, you mentioned these joint task force that are working across police services on the gun and gang issue. Are you including First Nations police services in those task forces?
Yeah, thank you for that. Now we have some great partnerships with all police services and enforcement agencies across the country, but with regards to these integrated enforcement teams, they're working very well, and they do include Indigenous police services. And I think I would ask Deputy Duhem to expand on that, because federal policing has some great partnerships with them on the border.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. To your question, ma'am, yeah, we do have good relationships with Indigenous communities throughout the country. Mind you, it might vary from the others, but when we're talking about along the borders, we do have a good relationship. I will give you an example in Quebec with the Akwesasne Mohawk Police Service. There's an integrated team on the Indigenous community that works together to deal with anything that's coming in contraband, such as drugs, firearms, human smuggling. So there is a nice, quite tight knit, and that I'm excluding right now our American partners, but there's a whole net there of partners working together to combat the contraband phenomenon, regardless of what's being smuggled.
I only have 15 seconds left. How long has that task force been in place at Akwesasne? Do you know?
I would have to follow up with you on that. More than happy. I don't have the exact time.
Do you know if it's new or if it's been around for a while? You let us know. You let us know. My time's up.
So it's been around for several years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for being so conscious of time. I know how precious it is. Now I would ask Ms. Michaud to do and tell us what's on her mind for the next 2.5 minutes. Floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to get back to what Mr. Weber was saying earlier, but I'd like to hear what CBSA has to say about it too. especially about the way they could expand the mandate of their officers. Is that something you support? Is that something that you think could really help against the fight against gun smuggling?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. On behalf of CBSA, I would say that our perspective on the issue of mandates is going to take a comprehensive response in partnership with many people to effectively address firearm smuggling. As has been mentioned, CBSA currently has the mandate and the authority at the port of entry, and the RCMP have the mandate between the ports of entry. But I will say that we work hand in hand on a daily basis to bring together our expertise in combating this problem. And we currently have over 13 joint force operations with the RCMP and other police of jurisdiction across the country that are yielding results. Our approach is an intelligence-based one, so it's imperative that we work very closely with those who have mandates for criminal code infractions and, importantly, for organized crime, in order to be able to identify the trends that are happening so that we can intervene surgically as possible to deter firearms from crossing the border. So overall, I would say that we are working closely with our partners to leverage our mandate as well as their mandates to the greatest effect for Canadians. That said, we continue to review our mandate, we continue to review our requirements, and we'll continue to do so as we continue to move forward.
Ms. Michaud, you have 30 seconds.
Merci. Ben, je vais poser la question et peut-être qu'on pourra la...
Well, I'll put the question, maybe they could answer later. You're talking about cooperation with various police forces. Do you find the cooperation is sufficient right now, or could this go beyond the simple exchange of information? It seems to me that it's often only that, an exchange of intelligence perhaps, but nothing more. Do you think there could be greater collaboration?
Do you want me to answer now?
Yeah, take 10 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, I think we do both. We have operational collaborations and we have information sharing collaborations, and I think it's about applying the right tool at the right time, given what the goals of the collaboration are intended for.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGregor, you have 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. White, if I can just quickly continue with the line of questioning that Ms. Damoff had, just on the verification of a license during that transaction, can you just provide a little bit more detail, like how is the identity verified, the date of birth, whether the license is valid, and so on? Just a little bit more information on, what the RCMP is actually doing when that request comes through.
Yep, thank you. There is an established process for that. I'll turn to Ms. Paquette to provide a little more detail.
Sure, thank you. If license verification proceeds as written, the seller will be required to verify that the buyer has a valid license for the non-restricted firearm prior to the sale, so visually inspecting that. And that includes the picture as well as the information on the license. Once that's confirmed, the seller will then be responsible for submitting a request to the registrar for a request for a license verification number. If the license is valid, they will receive that verification number. The verification number will be valid for a maximum of 90 days. And therefore, if the transaction does not occur within the 90 days, seller will be required to request an additional verification number.
Thank you. So am I to understand that the seller has to be satisfied with the visual representation? It's up to the seller to verify that the picture on the license matches the image of the person who's doing the buying.
That's correct. So that's the first check. And then once the seller is confident the buyer is the same person visually as the license, then they will request of the license through the registrar.
And may I ask, how does the RCMP verify that the seller that they are doing the correct visual matchup? Is this based on an honor system? Do you have some way of following up to ensure that nothing nefarious is happening?
this point, it would be based on that the buyer is, the seller is responsible for that visual inspection of the license.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
Thank you very much. Now we will give the floor to Mr. Shipley, who will have 5 minutes. Over to you, Mr. Shipley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is going to start off with a little bit of a statement. It sounds like, for lack of a better term, we're trying to find the proverbial needle in a haystack. Knowing just the sheer amount of goods that comes over the border is mind-boggling. And then hearing some statements like from Mr. Weber earlier, who mentioned that 1/1,000,000th, I believe, and if I quoted you wrong, please correct me, of the rail is inspected. There's virtually 0% chance of catching a little bit that comes over. I'd like to know about the collaboration. I think a lot of the problem is, we have such a mass border is size-wise, finding it before it's coming up. I'd like to know from a few of the different agencies, what is the collaboration being done with the states to prevent it from getting up to our border? Is that being worked on? And is that somewhere we can be improving on more readily? Perhaps we could start with our border services agencies on the collaborations with their partners in the states.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. CBSA works very closely, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, with the U.S. Agency for Firearms and Homeland Security and others. In fact, in 2021, we established a cross-border task force on firearms that involves CBSA, the RCMP, as well as the ATF, HSI, and other American partners, CBP, specifically to tackle this issue together, to leverage our respective sort of knowledge bases in terms of intelligence, but also our ability to intervene. Border enforcement isn't something that just happens at the border. There's measures that we take before the border, there's measures we take at the border, and there's measures that we can take after the border. And it's imperative that we bring together the resources from all of those partners to address that, and that's what we're doing. One of the first products that this group is currently working on is a joint threat assessment that will help to more precisely target and identify efforts that can be undertaken by the respective agencies, either together or independent in their mandates, so that we can fully work together, respecting obviously that we do have differences in legislation and other things that we have to be mindful of.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Perhaps maybe just one of the representatives from the RCMP can maybe touch on the collaboration going on also would be nice to know.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'll lead off and I'll introduce, invite Deputy Zuem afterwards. As Scott just said, we have great collaboration, with the same partners that he just mentioned in the U.S., Homeland Security, ATF. On top of that, we also have great collaboration, joint investigations with agencies like Drug Enforcement Agency, for example. A lot of organized crime groups, once they get established successful smuggling routes across the border, even though their mainstay may be smuggling illegal narcotics, they may also use those same smuggling routes for smuggling other contraband, such as firearm smuggling. So sometimes we can get great intelligence out of organized crime investigations working with those types of agencies as well. Mike, anything to add?
Yes, sorry. I will add, sir, to that response is that from a federal policing perspective, not only nationally, provincially, and with municipal partners that we're working the border, is also internationally with our Five Eyes partners. And with the U.S. counterparts, we have several teams, integrated teams that are set up throughout the border to address, share intel, investigate, and whatnot. It is, you did say, the needle in a haystack. We do have one of the longest international borders in the world. With a different type of geography as you go from the East Coast to the West Coast, that makes it more complex. But there's really good relationships going on with all agencies and countries.
Thank you for that, Chair. Is there still time remaining?
Yes, you have 1 minute.
All right, thank you. So more specifically then, and thank you for those answers, gentlemen. On March 31st, 2021, there was a Liberal government announcement that the CBSA will be tasking with creating a joint task force with the relevant U.S. agencies to address drug smuggling. Was that specific task force established, and how is that operating?
Thank you. Yes, this is the task force that I was just referencing with the partners that I've identified. They are working together quite closely. It's been operating since the fall, and they are working currently on a joint threat assessment in the firearms space at the current time, which we expect in February of this year.
Mr. Shipley, you've got 15 seconds.
Well, I was just going to quickly ask, I'm hoping there'll be some successes out of that, Mr. Harris. If we can hear about any successes now or down the road would be great for that task force.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much. Mr. Zuberi, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Over to you.
Monsieur le Président, et j'aimerais remercier tout le monde d'être ici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank everyone for being here and helping to protect Canadians.
Ask globally in terms of we've been hearing a lot about gun violence in Montreal. Are there any hotspots in the country, in particular, when it relates to gun violence and illegal arms trafficking? If you can quickly just speak to that global point.
Yeah, I would just comment. I mentioned earlier on, I think in the larger municipalities across the country, I think the firearm seizures, especially handgun seizures across the country, if we look at it just because of population, the biggest seizures of and I guess firearms related homicides, which is a significant indicator of violence by gangs and organized crime, but between in 2020, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, and Ottawa were the top ones, and that's just based on I think largely on the population that they have there. And so Toronto had the highest number of victims, firearm-related homicides in 2020, followed by Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary. So in 2019, that was very similar. So that's an indicator of where a lot of the gang violence and firearm homicides are taking place.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. In terms of le gouvernement de Québec en septembre 2021.
In September 2021, Quebec announced an operation.
The RCMP's involvement in this operation with Quebec. Can you talk about, explain this to us for the committee?
Yeah, absolutely. Mike?
Yeah, I will take that one, Steve. Thank you. The federal policing has an important role when it comes to firearms. The feed-in that we're providing to Projet Centaure, we have several resources that are embedded with Projet Centaure from an analytical point of view at the senior level as well. We're part of the, if I remember, part of the Operational Strategic Committee on that. And we try and tie in our expertise and the work that we have with our partners on the border to feed Centaure and what we're seeing border-wise. If there's seizures between the ports of entry, there's communication direct with Centaure and whatnot to exchange that information. And even I'm saying the U.S., but even on the international scene. So we are fully engaged in Projet Centaure and mindful that a provincial initiative, but the federal aspect comes in and is looking at it from a federal perspective of what we could add more to Projet Centaure. So last I heard, things are going very well with regards to Projet Centaure.
Okay, merci beaucoup. We heard some testimony earlier around staffing at CBSA, and I'd just like to clarify to the CBSA officials to put this question to you, please. What we from the information I have as of 2015-2016, there have been in actuality 600 additional full-time employees that have been added to CBSA. Can you confirm if that's actually the case?
Yeah, that is the case. Between March 2016 and March 2021, there has been a 4.5% increase in our workforce of 622 FTEs that have been onboarded across the agency to respond to emerging initiatives. Some of those that were mentioned earlier include to support irregular migration efforts, as well as specific investments related to firearms and guns and gangs. That have come on board.
Okay, and we've heard in testimony so far that CBSA right now doesn't have the ability to patrol the border with the RCMP. Can you explain to us why? How can that help to get rid of, or not to get rid of, but to deal with gun trafficking? Can somebody explain that with clarity? Why that would be important aside from the fact that it's not the case currently?
I would say that, as I said before, we have the mandate primarily at the ports of entry, and the RCMP have the mandate between the ports, and I would probably defer to them to speak to those efforts between the ports. I think from a CBSA perspective, we want to have an intelligence-led approach to this and to bring to bear our resources where they're most appropriate, so that we're targeting, as we say, those routes that we're identifying, as well as the actors that are involved in the smuggling of firearms, so that we can effectively not only sort of interrupt it at the border, but more importantly, that we disrupt that activity on a more long-term basis, preventing it from getting there.
Is CBSA more skilled in this particular aspect of crime prevention?
Very, very short answer, please.
I would say that our expertise is in the area of customs and the application of the laws in that space, whereas the RCMP have the expertise in the criminal code.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. This ends the second round of questioning. We'll now move directly into the third round, a combination of 5-minute and 2.5-minute slots, but it begins with a 5-minute slot for Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My primary questions are going to be targeted at Mr. Weber, Mr. Helena, and Madam Paquette. I believe that in terms of gun control, when we're talking about creating more paperwork, it's really only going to create a marginal small change in impacting crime. And when we're talking about increasing personnel, which has been a large recommendation we've seen today, we know how expensive that can be. We know we have an aging population. It's going to be incredibly hard to train and source and retain new people. So I think we really need to start looking at, with those solutions, with alternative solutions. And I really haven't heard about any alternative solutions except for nebulous technology things. So I'm going to focus in on technology. Mr. Weber, you were talking about how it's virtually impossible to monitor the rail lines. I'm aware of a company in Canada, Patriot One Technologies, that's using artificial intelligence and radar scanning. It has clients across the United States, including the United States government, major casinos, schools, as a way to identify through artificial intelligence and radar when there's concealed weapons being involved. Is there any effort or funding or planning being put forward by border services to utilize these technologies as a force multiplier for personnel?
Thank you for the question. That I'm aware of, no.
Okay. It's disappointing, not blaming you, but it is disappointing that, it seems like you were talking about, having telephone, and you were talking about how almost useless it is to have telephone at ports of entry for people to make reports. Like, this is an analog solution when we're living in a digital world. And, I think we need to be looking at digital solutions like artificial intelligence and blockchain technology. And when talking about blockchain technology, I'll be kind of transferring over to Madam Paquette. As a gun owner myself, registered and non-registered, we have all this paperwork, and, we're content to do the paperwork, but gun owners are only seeing very marginal, we're not really seeing how this is preventing criminals who we know don't do the paperwork. I was reading a recent paper by Thomas Heston from the Washington State University back in 2017, talking about the possibility of using blockchain technology as a way to create private ledgers to track the sale and ownership of firearms. I see this as a possible way we could create a cost-effective gun control solution while making it less onerous for legal firearms owners. Is the Canadian Firearms Program researching blockchain or how to use blockchain for any purposes?
I would have to validate with the technical teams, but I will take that back to make sure that we are looking at that.
Okay. No offense. I'm just a little bit disappointed that, people talk about technology, but it doesn't appear like, the latest technology that we're seeing come up in front of us on a day-to-day basis doesn't appear to be being integrated. And I want to see more vision from this government in terms of, ways that we can make this more effective while making this less onerous on gun owners. Mr. Helena, you're with the tracing and laboratory services. I know you guys have a ballistics lab, but are you guys contemplating using any blockchain technology or artificial intelligence to track firearms?
Just for clarity, we do the forensic analysis of firearms on behalf of law enforcement agencies across Canada, with the exception of Ontario and Quebec, who have their own provincial labs. We're not involved in the tracing of firearms. The one aspect we are is the serial number restoration and where we use a lot of different technologies to advance restoring obliterated serial numbers, and then we pass on that information to the Canadian Firearms Program for the tracing purposes.
Thank you. Madam Paquette, going back to you, has there been instances where the Canadian Firearms Program has been hacked and firearms owners' private information has been leaked?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, is that a concern that you guys have, or are you guys taking proactive measures to prevent that from happening?
Yes, we are always looking at that to make sure that is top of our mind, is to protect the information of the license holders. I will say, I just want to add on technology. With the recent investments, we are going to be redeveloping our national systems, looking at the utilization of the current technologies.
Mr. Lloyd, you've got about 8 seconds.
Well, I'll let it go there. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Noor Mohammed, on the other hand, you have 5 minutes in this round, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thanks to all those who have joined us today. I'd like to ask my question to Deputy Commissioner White, if I might. In the testimony today, we've heard that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we'd heard that 73% of crimes that are being committed by legally obtained weapons. So I'm just wondering, on the back of that, or legally obtained or weapons that could be traced back in Canada, I'm wondering on the back of that, if we are making the right investments into making sure that we are figuring out what could be done in terms of introduction of those weapons and understanding what might be done about those weapons versus just focusing on the border, where some folks seem to think we should be really leaning in. Wondering what more we could be doing, or what you think we should be doing to be leaning in on these domestically obtained or likely domestically obtained weapons.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. For the domestically obtained, obviously, again, it's going back to working with the police agencies who seized those firearms to identify the full details of the circumstances around that firearm, even though it was, illegal firearms in Canada, who had it at the time of the that it was seized by police. Was it seized as part of a criminal investigation or other circumstances? So in terms of tracing that we talked about, and this is one area we're looking to go, it is tracing a firearm back as far as we can, but also working with the police agency to full details of the incidents when they seized that firearm, and bringing all that information together to give us a much more strategic understanding in terms of how all of those firearms are being used in criminal activities or being seized across the country.
Just build on that a little bit then. My friend, Mr. Lloyd, mentioned that he is a firearm owner. He has registered and unregistered weapons. What would happen, and what would be sort of the chain of events that would happen if Mr. Lloyd's unregistered weapon were somehow found to have been part of a criminal activity or a crime? What would that do in terms of the work that you'd have to do?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead. Point of order.
Mr. Chair, I just don't think that, the question, the substance of the question, but looping me in here, I think is very inappropriate, Mr. Chair. And I would ask that the opposite member would rescind that.
I think the question, without the reference, can stand on its own.
Happy, so certainly. No offense is intended. Certainly happy to rephrase the question. If an unregistered firearm were used, what would that do in terms of the workload and the work that you'd have to do to be able to trace that weapon?
Yeah, obviously, more work in terms of tracing back, because it was an unregistered firearm. We can do, with the serial number, we can trace some of it back. But the big piece here would be working with the police agency to determine the circumstances of the criminal investigation that resulted in the seizure of that firearm. And, was that firearm registered as being lost or stolen at some point in the past? So it could vary in terms of how much work would be required, depending on the nature of the criminal investigation that the firearms was seized against, and the circumstances of the firearm, whether it was lost, stolen, or possibly diverted at some point as well.
And my final, another question for you, subject to recognizing we're running out of time here. In terms of the number of unlicensed firearms, non-registered firearms that you are seeing, do you think that we should be putting more emphasis on trying to figure out how to address that matter? And what would you recommend in terms of providing feedback or advice to folks that have non-registered firearms that may not be you having them for illegal purposes?
Yeah, again, a number of circumstances with that. We'd look at it. Were unregistered firearms seized? Could we trace it back to as part of a straw purchasing activity where a legal license owner is going and purchasing unregistered firearms legally and then diverting those, for example, into the illicit firearms market? But I will ask Ms. Paquette if she has anything additional to add.
No, the only thing I would add is around the tracing and the internet investigations that are also completed as part of our package of when we get that firearm.
Mr. Noor Mohammed, you have 30 seconds left.
I will give those back to the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Then we'll segue right into Ms. Michaud, who has 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Mr. White of the RCMP. In your opening statement, you talked about a seizure of 53 pistols, 6 rifles in the past year. It's difficult to evaluate whether this is good or bad. We don't necessarily have all the figures telling us how many weapons will cross the border or could get to, let's say, Montreal. In the Journal de Montréal, recently we read that there were some 2,000 illegal weapons circulating just in Montreal. So the figures we have don't seem like much. So what explains that there are so few seizures at the border?
For the seize.
I think we do seize weapons quite regularly. I'd ask Mr. Duhem if he can shed light on this. Yes, indeed. I read that article in the Journal de Montréal. When it comes to that seizure, if my memory serves me, it was at the port of entry. This was the route people were using to bring contraband into Canada. As I explained earlier, it's a challenge when you're at the ports of entry because of the geography and the length of our border. As far as the impact is concerned, I can't speculate. I would be speculating about the impact of those 53, but we know they came in illegally. Well, precisely that. You're talking about the complexity of the territory, the length of the border. We know there are many weapons that come through Akwesasne. We were talking about cooperation with the police service there, but I get the impression that maybe more could be done. Do you have any indications about the number of firearms that might get through daily, monthly, weekly on that territory? No, I have no indication. And the Akwesasne route has been known for many, many years by contraband artists. All I can assure you of is that we are working closely with the Akwesasne Mohawk Police Service, the Quebec Police in Valleyfield Detachment, and the Cornwall OPP Detachment, and U.S. Border Patrol, and so on, as well as the teams we have.
Mr. McGregor, over to you for 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Maybe I'll give Mr. Sauvé a chance to answer some questions here. Mr. Sauvé, my riding of Cowichan, Malahat, Langford out here on Vancouver Island, we are 100% policed by the RCMP. And, I know from the good relations I have with many members, the difficult job they do every day. They have certainly reiterated many of the staffing and resource challenges that you mentioned in your opening statement. And indeed, with the raging opioids crisis that's going on in my community, many are being called to intervene in a lot of mental health and addictions work because we don't have those other resources as well. You made mention of the successful Surrey RCMP Shattering the Image anti-gang program, and previously your organization has called for legislation to effectively address gang diversion. Could you maybe, I don't have much time, I've got about a minute and a half. Can you maybe just elaborate a little bit more on how that anti-gang program has been successful, some of the key details, and legislation that you're referring to, because the criminal code often comes into effect after the fact. I'm more interested in what kind of proactive policies and legislation we can be enacting at the federal level. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I did mention the Surrey RCMP Shattering the Image program. Obviously, there are a number of them. One of the other ones is the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit in British Columbia's it's called End Gang Life program. And it has to do with really a lot of community outreach and education. And ultimately, they are extremely blunt in the message that they deliver through public advertising, Twitter, youth outreach, school liaison programs, all delivered about. And you know, if you see some of the CFSEU ads, it is blunt advertising that speaks to the target audience of youth looking to get into the classy life of crime and organized crime. You know, pictures of caskets and little stories, snippets. So from that perspective, it's really about engagement and partnership of law enforcement agencies with those community outreach programs, and ensuring that there are some metrics in place to make sure that we're spending our dollars wisely and pushing the right message that is having an impact.
Thank you very much. Now I will ask Mr. Shipley to begin his 5 minutes. He has the floor. Mr. Shipley.
Thank you, Chair. Through all these discussions of, I'm not a gun owner myself and don't profess to be an expert on them, but there's been some tragic events lately south of my riding in the GTA area, and more so right in Barrie recently, where a young teen was shot to death. Could you please, with the influx of handguns, I sometimes wonder where these young teens are even getting the money to purchase them. If so many are coming across the border, maybe someone from our RCMP would be able to know this. What are illegal handguns costing on the market, black market?
Go ahead, if I may, Mr. Chair, I can't speak specifically for the Toronto area, but the conversation with Madame Michaud earlier, the article she was referring to in Le Journal de Montréal, the local paper in the city of Montreal, my recollection is right, and I'm not going to say just handguns, but firearms vary from $1,000 to $8,000. And Madame Michaud can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my recollection of, for an illegal firearm on the market, that's what's the going price in Montreal, and I'd probably venture to say even in the province.
Well, thank you for that. That brings up some questions as to where young teens, 13, 14, are getting $1,000 even on their own. Perhaps this may lead into it, and maybe one of our counterparts, the RCMP, can answer this, please. I'm not sure who to direct this to exactly. So how large of a role do gangs or organized crimes play in the cross-border smuggling of firearms? And what is the best way to combat this?
Yeah, I'll go ahead, Mike.
So I would say to your question, sir, a huge part of that. Anywhere where there's some a monetary gain to be made, they're bringing it in for sole purpose of reselling it to the people. And what we're seeing, what the information that I've seen, is really towards the street gangs that are bringing it in and then selling it to the people, just as examples like you provide in Toronto. And I'll pass it over to Steve if he has more statistics from the CISC.
Yeah. Landscape for organized crime, and I would invite everyone. Last week, we did release a public report on organized crime in Canada, and it really, purpose of the report is help raise public awareness of organized crime groups operating in Canada, and really give us that perspective, the law enforcement and government. But just as a snapshot, CISC, Criminal Intelligence Service Canada, they estimate that there are, 2,600 organized crime groups known or believed to be operating in Canada. 469 of them were assessed during the CISC's threat assessment last year. A number of them identified as high-level threats and very much heavily involved in the narcotic trade. I think 250 organized crime groups were assessed as being involved in the fentanyl market, 300 plus organized crime groups involved with the methamphetamine market. So with the drug trafficking environment goes the use of firearms, obviously by organized crime groups or by gangs somewhat recruited by organized crime groups to assist with street level distribution, street level trafficking of drugs as well. And that's where you go back to where they're making the money. That's where the money comes in. So a lot of gangs are supported and financed by the work they're doing on behalf of organized crime groups.
Thank you for that, Mr. White. And I'm going to ask a very pertinent question. Do you believe that in Canada we have a handgun issue or an organized crime issue?
Both.
Okay, neither one is more precedent over the other. One's not leading to the other. They're both go hand in hand, for lack of a better term.
The nature of the activity they're both involved in, whether it's gangs or higher level or organized crime, that's what leads to the use of firearms and the need to acquire illegal handguns or illegal firearms.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I lost track of my time. Is there still some more time? Because I was just switch my line.
You have 50 seconds, 50.
Well, I'll start. I had some questions for Mr. Sauvé. Mr. Sauvé, I read a little bit about your bio. I know you've been a member for a while and now you're the president of your association there. So I'd like to get some feedback from your members if I could. I'm sure you deal with them quite often. According to your members, what would be the best organizational changes the RCMP could make to better combat illegal gun smuggling?
Only about 30 seconds to answer a 30-day question. That's a difficult one. I honestly, at the moment, I spoke earlier about resources, and we have some excellent partnerships with the CBSA provincial municipal partnerships, but resources is the big thing. And I think you're hearing that across the board, whether it's from CBSA or if you talk to municipal and provincial police services, things are falling through the cracks because our priorities are 911 at the moment versus proactive larger scale issues.
Thank you very much. Now for the last slot in this round, a 5-minute slot, I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Chang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, everybody, for participating and giving us your valuable time. My question is directed to the RCMP. We have heard about the importance of intelligence gathering or intelligence sharing between law enforcement services. Can you elaborate on the importance of this cooperation and provide any ideas you have to increase cooperation between the various departments?
Yeah, no, excellent question, sir. And thank you very much for that. And the answer would be it's critical. The more intelligence and the better intelligence that we can share between law enforcement agencies right across the country, the better understanding we'll have of the criminal landscape and the more insights we'll have in terms of how we counter that. The one big gap we have had now for a number of years, we do have a national criminal intelligence system in this country, one system that is used by every police service, law enforcement agency in the country. That system is built on a platform that is decades old and it no longer serves the purpose, a very effective purpose of exchanging, developing and sharing intelligence between police services. We just received a significant investment from the government to build and roll out a very brand new, modern, robust Canadian criminal intelligence systems with very modern, very advanced analytics. And I think that is going to significantly advance the volume of intelligence and the nature of that intelligence that we're going to be able to develop and share a lot better than we have been in the past. For me, the development of that system, that's going to be a bit of a game changer in terms of the sharing of intelligence.
Thank you, Mr. White. In the past, I heard that the various agency works in a silo. I'm just wondering if, based on what you're saying, is those days have gone and the intelligence sharing is much more elaborate and there's more cooperation between agencies?
It is, but there's always more work to do with regards to continuing to encourage all police services to share as much intelligence as they can whether it's, with regards to organized crime, firearms, other illicit activities. We need everybody to be sharing in a very robust manner, and very hopeful, as I mentioned, once that new system comes online that is currently being developed, that system will facilitate that.
Thank you so much. My follow-up question is for the CBSA, Mr. Harris, if you could. The information you provided about the joint task force, the cross-border one, which was established last year, could you elaborate some more about the work that has been done, and has it been fruitful in what we're doing with the JTF?
Yes, thank you for the question. The committee has started meeting as of the fall and bringing the partners together specifically for the purpose of identifying these patterns and threats that you're talking about. So the intelligence, not only the sharing, but the actual consolidation of some of that intelligence so that people can have a more sophisticated understanding of what it all means and how we can choose to intervene in it. Some of that work will come together, as I said earlier, in a report later this year. That will bring that together. But the task force is also a forum to your point about continued collaboration, to provide a venue to ensure that we don't get lost in collaborations that maybe aren't as effective, and that we have a forum to pave out those relationships. Given the complexity of mandates on both sides of the border, I think it's imperative that we have a venue to do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Thank you. I'm just going to do an open question if whoever would like to answer the question. In regards to gang violence, I heard there's an increase in gang violence. Is that to do with the economic situation in our country, or the gang violence has been traditionally going on and has increased in the time at this time?
Yeah, I'll just start off. I think it's always been going, and there has been, increases and decreases over the years, and it is reflective of a number of things in terms of gangs, for example, their recruitment efforts, more relationships, liaisons you have between street gangs and organized crime groups, depending on the especially in the urban areas, that's where more street gangs tend to evolve, and the competition between each other. So it depends on the drug markets in those areas as well. So a lot of factors come into play in terms of determining the level, scope, and intensity of the violence related to street gangs. One thing I can say, I think I said it earlier, street gangs traditionally tend to be much more overt in the open with regards to their violent activities.
Thank you very much. And that completes the round of questions. So we move to a fresh one. And the opening floor goes to Ms. Dancho, who will have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions for the CBSA. Mr. Harris, you said in your opening remarks that, and if you can just verify the numbers, $51.5 million over, I think you said 5 years, an additional $7 million in addition to that over that period as well, specifically for gun smuggling. So about $60 million for gun smuggling over 5 years. Is that about right?
Yeah, so it was 51.5 over the first 5 years and then 7.5 ongoing. So it'll be money that continues into the future.
Okay, so a little bit of a boost plus a 5-year kind of spread out. Got it.
Right.
And that's specifically for the task of combating gun smuggling, correct?
Guns and gang violence. I would add to that, we also had a recent announcement announced in Budget 2021 that has a 5-year investment of $38.5 million with an ongoing amount of over $6 million as well that will supplement those efforts as well.
Oh, okay. So just under about 100 million, 90 million, all things considered over about 5 years.
Right.
Additionally, so that's great news. So you would say that additional injection of taxpayer dollars is going to be well spent and contribute to combating gun violence at our border, like in essence, the gun smuggling and the gang activity coming across the border.
Yeah, it targets a number of different activities that we'll be undertaking, some of which obviously has been ongoing since 2018, including to the point of adding technology, introducing new technologies and exploring new technologies that can enhance our capacities, enhancing drug detector capacity and training capacity, as well as in expanding and enhancing our intelligence and investigative capacity.
Okay. And do you believe that the proposed federal or the imminent federal gun so-called buyback program. Do you believe that that's going to stop gun smuggling or contribute to stopping gun smuggling of guns coming from the US into Canada? Do you think the Canadian buyback program will help that in any way?
From a CBSA perspective, I think the challenge of combating firearms is multifaceted, and it's going to require a whole of government response. It's going to take many facets to do that. I mean, CBSA is very focused on ensuring that we use the resources that we've been given and the investments that we've been given to the greatest effect, and that's our current focus is to move forward with using our mandate appropriately.
Right, and do you feel that any provincial handgun ban would stop handguns, a provincial handgun ban in Canada would stop handguns from being smuggled from the US into Canada? Do you think that would be effective?
I can't speak to provincial regulations or legislation to this effect. As I say, we work closely with our provincial partners and our territorial partners, and we'll continue to do so to leverage our mandate to support their efforts to combat firearm smuggling.
Right. I think my point is really that it sounds like there's some investments being made, but there are billions and billions of proposed dollars that will be spent on a so-called buyback program, as well as proposed potential provincial handgun ban. And I'm not getting a clear sense from you that that's going to have a clear impact on one of the primary causes of gun violence of gun smuggling from the U.S. border into Canada. So I did want to go to Mr. Weber. I would like to know, sorry, Mr. Chair, can we just pause the time? There's something.
Yeah, there is. We will pause the time, and someone's got themselves on unmute.
Mr. Chang, I think. Mr. Chang, if you can mute yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. All right, I'm just going to consider that another 30 seconds, Chair. So to Mr. Weber, your entire opening remarks were about strapped resources for hardworking border agents, which are having to patrol, as you said, the largest undefended border in the world with one of the countries that owns some of the most firearms per capita in the world. So obviously we're seeing a huge impact of gun violence in Canada coming from smuggling of guns in the United States. So I'd like to know just if you can give us a couple ideas of what your officers would be able to do with an additional $1 billion or $2 billion or $3 billion. What would that mean to your officers for patrolling our border and stopping gun smuggling?
Thank you. And I heard the comments about increased technology and putting some of the money towards intelligence, which makes sense, all of which doesn't achieve anything unless there's anyone there to actually do the search, to open the rail car, to look into the car. That's really what we're lacking. We seem to be gathering data and gathering data and gathering data. And when you look at a mode like rail, we have absolutely no ability to actually look into anything. So I think it's building that infrastructure and having the people to actually find the guns. That's where some of that money needs to go.
Right. And you had mentioned that your capacity to look at the millions of tons of cargo that come on rail into Canada from the US every year is 1/1,000,000th. Is that correct? That's the capacity you have. So that's essentially, as you mentioned, zero capacity to check rail. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. And so how many more border agents would you say we would need to significantly increase monitoring of illegal activity related to guns, drug smuggling, and gun smuggling?
And to include in that patrolling between borders, I think you could safely be looking at an extra 1,000, 1,500.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, I will call upon Mr. McKinnon to begin his 5-minute line of questioning. Mr. McKinnon, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. We've had considerable emphasis in this today on border issues. But according to the numbers we had earlier, we see that domestic sources for firearms are 3 to 1 greater than border issues. So it seems to me that would be a place we should be taking a hard look. Now, admittedly, those numbers are based on what appears to be a small data set. And I would certainly underscore the remarks, I believe, by Ms. Dancho earlier that on the importance of increasing tracing so we can get better data. But I guess my question is to both Mr. Sauvé and to the RCMP regarding what more can we do to reduce the domestic sourcing of these firearms for criminal activities or violence activities. Let's start with the RCMP, please.
Go ahead, Mike.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I'll go back, Mr. McKinnon, to a comment that the president of NPF, Mr. Brian Sauvé, said earlier. It starts with education and outreach. You could take down a criminal organization tomorrow. There's another one just waiting to fill that spot. And one of the ways, I think it's got to be done in tandem, but one of the ways we really have to focus on the educational piece, that awareness piece, that outreach piece, to really have an impact, while the law enforcement's working on the other piece with organized crime. But we've seen it many, many times. You take one organization down, there's another one in line to take that job and take that position, and it's just a domino effect. So for me, one of the key initiatives would be that outreach, prevention measures, and getting out to the younger people, the people who are thinking about joining these organizations.
I would just add to that, Mr. McKinnon, key issue with regards to domestic firearms being diverted into the illicit firearms market. I mentioned earlier straw purchasing. So we have been seeing this for a while, and it is continuing. So someone with a legitimate firearms license going out and purchasing multiple firearms legitimately, unregistered, and selling those into the illicit firearms market. So we have recently put in some new enhancements to get better at identifying and working with businesses to detect that. So we're hoping moving forward, we're going to have a much better relationship with the businesses to be able to identify those straw purchasers that are operating.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you, Mr. Sauvé. As you're members of the National Police Federation, basically are dealing in situations where they are the police of jurisdiction. I'm wondering what kind of issues there are relating to jurisdictional issues when it comes to interdiction of firearms and so forth in working with the RCMP, whether there are issues that we can address or that we need to be aware of.
I haven't heard, doing some research into this before we created our position statement 2 years ago on gun violence in Canada. I haven't heard of any challenges of interagency cooperation, whether it be with municipal, provincial police services, the CBSA, or even Corrections Canada. However, there have been challenges with respect to legislation and improving the Canadian Firearms Program. For example, requirements for police agencies to submit firearms that are found or sent for destruction for tracing. Right there, right now there is no requirement for that. So an estate is settled and there's 5 guns in it, whether they are unregistered and they get turned over to the police of jurisdiction for destruction. We don't have a requirement for that police of jurisdiction to send those guns for tracing. So could we change that? Could we improve that system? Could we make different resource improvements and technology improvements for the firearms program to be able to track guns in Canada that are not registered and perhaps outside of the mandate?
Thank you. I suspect that's the end of my time.
Well, you got about 30 seconds if you want them, Mr. McKinnon.
I'll donate it to the cost. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then we will go to Ms. Michaud for a 2.5-minute round. Floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll pick up where I left off with Mr. White concerning the better-known territory that we've known for a number of years now as being places where there is contraband, that contraband criminals know very well. They're well organized to pass illegal weapons. Even if there have been considerable investments and efforts deployed by the government, we keep hearing through the media that there are traffickers who brag that the border's a sieve, that it's very easy to traffic weapons. There are mules who do this until Montreal and put this in the hands of youth or street gangs. I'm trying to understand, in your opinion, what should we do more so that all this stops someday? Because I'm not sure there's a solution we can put in place. There's not one magic solution anyway. It's a very complex problem. But beyond collaboration between partners and investment, what can we really do to find a solution to this? Thank you very much for your question. Mike, do you want to start? I'm talking about the border.
Oui.
Yes, thank you for the question. I'll repeat what I said earlier, Madam. With respect to the people who do this work every day, the atmosphere and the partnership is excellent. It's always a question of capacity, given the size of the border we have to monitor and protect. What I can tell you is at the federal police level, we obtained funding to proceed with a team that will do a national study of the border and look at the technology and how it could be maximized in some places and the resources necessary. Right now, we use technology sporadically from east to west. I talked about geography, which is problematic. We don't have all the appropriate infrastructure to have the technology we would like to have. So that's a challenge, but we have to look at technology and have targeted teams for that. I'd also like to say that cooperation with the U.S. when it comes to technology is excellent. There's great cooperation and coordination when it comes to technology and how it's installed.
Mr. McGregor, I will now turn to you and offer you 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Well, how generous of you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much. Mr. White, I think in a previous exchange, there were some questions being asked about the proposed mandatory buyback program and whether such a program would be effective. The theme of my question would be really on what we can learn from other jurisdictions around the world. You know, who's engaging in policy that's actually having verifiable effects. So, for example, on a mandatory gun buyback program, Australia had phenomenal success. They had measured reductions in both homicides and suicides after they engaged in a mandatory gun buyback following the Port Arthur massacre. But with respect to illegal firearms trafficking, gang violence, etc., are there any jurisdictions around the world that Canada can take some serious policy lessons from, where the measurable metrics are all heading in the right direction? I think it's incumbent upon us for policymakers not to operate in a silo, but to learn from best practices. So maybe for the committee's benefit, if you could identify some jurisdictions which are having measurable successes and maybe what policies are leading to those successes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. No, unfortunately, I don't have that, haven't done that type of research. I think that may be more for policy individuals at government who may have done that research, but I am aware of the New Zealand example. Obviously, the geography of New Zealand very different from Canada, so I wouldn't be in a position to transition what happened there to Canada's environment. So, but unfortunately, no. I don't have that research.
I'm cognizant of the fact that, with us sharing the border with the United States, one of the largest gun manufacturers, or the largest weapons manufacturer in the world. So would you say there are, in fact, officials in Public Safety Canada who are engaged in this research? Are you aware of it going on? I just wanted to be aware of that.
No, I am not aware if they have, to what extent they've done that research, but that could be a place to check.
Okay.
Mr. McGregor, you've got 10 seconds to spend.
I will donate them back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Holy smokes, we may get up to a minute. Everybody is being so generous. So now we will turn the floor over to Mr. Shipley, who will have 5 minutes. Sir, the floor is yours.
I'm taking it, Mr. Chair.
I was just going to say, Mr. Chair, we've done a bit of an audible, and Mr. Lloyd will be taking my time.
So I'll just go ahead there. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Lloyd.
My question's for Mr. White. We're hearing a lot about the 73% number in 2020. Would you say that, have you measured, like, with the COVID restrictions preventing, all but essential workers from crossing the border, do you think that had a major impact on this statistic?
Yeah, very good question. Two things I would say there. First, we haven't finalized our statistics in terms of seizures and for 2021 and done that analysis. And two, the 2020 numbers that I did talk about, again, it was a very small subset of the total number of firearms that were seized and a small subset of the number of firearms seized linked to criminal investigations as well. So
So would you say that's a statistically useful number, or you're saying it's such a small subset that it's not really that statistically useful to you?
No, it is a useful number. It does provide some insights, but I think we would need to do more tracing on a larger scale to really get some very good insights, patterns, and trends.
Would you say that that number is, if you were to take that number and apply it to other years, would that number be above average?
Now, we've seen an increase in recent years. Like I said, the number traced last year, I think was around 2,000 in 2020, 2,000. I think, our initial look at last year's 2021 numbers were well over 3,000 requests for tracing. So we are increasing.
Is that statistically high, or is it low for domestic sourcing?
Yeah, we don't have it broken down yet in terms of what the tracing results for 2021.
Like based on 2019, 2018, 2017, is that 73% number consistent in previous years that it's domestically sourced?
I think it is pretty consistent, but I'll refer to Ms. Paquette if she has any additional insights.
So unfortunately, we just tracing to this level. We've only been collecting this information for a few years now. It actually does vary depending from year to year. The biggest
number
issue
based on
is
the years, or a low number?
Sorry, the 73%. The 73%. So we saw 60%. Then we haven't seen higher than the 73%, but again, it's on a very small subset. And these figures vary significantly by type of firearm, by region, by year. So this is a national picture, right? So for example, while 85% of the traced long guns were domestically sourced from a national, the handgun figure for Ontario shows 79% traced handguns were foreign sourced. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on if you're looking from a region, a firearm, and by the year.
Thank you.
But I do believe this number is very high.
But handguns by their nature are much more smuggleable, if that's a word, than long guns, correct? You'd say it's a much higher proportion of handguns being smuggled than long guns?
It depends on where you're looking at the statistics. So yes, but they are much smaller, so they're easier to smuggle.
Something, philosophically looking at this, the laws of economics, if you make something more difficult to get, it just raises the price, which creates an incentive to get that item. And, I worry that, we could harden the border, but, we're going to see the laws of economics play in there. Is there a way, we've seen maybe a way to reduce the demand, or like on a consumer side, to for these for people who are criminals or people who could become criminals? What are the best ways that we can reduce the demand for illegally trafficked firearms? I guess Mr. White might be the best person, or Mr. Sauvé.
Yeah, that's something I would have to take away, I think, and for some additional follow-up.
Mr. Sauvé, you noted, Mr. Sauvé, in a report from the NPF that you don't believe that spending, maybe not you, but your report in previous years had said that the money being spent on the buyback isn't the best use of funds, and that there are alternatives. And one of the alternatives you posited is hiring more RCMP officers for specific tasks, like involved in tracing. What are some ways you think that we could reduce the demand for illegal firearms, whether they're domestic or smuggled from abroad?
We're out of time, but Mr. Sauvé, I'm going to give you 20 seconds to answer that question.
Certainly, our challenges with the buyback program is, it's once again increasing the mandate of an overstretched police service that doesn't have enough boots on the ground to do what it's doing today. But I as far as eliminating the gun crime in Canada, that's the $64,000 question. And really, it starts with a concerted approach of law enforcement community agencies doing concerted outreach with measurable metrics at the end to take the shine off of that attractive lifestyle.
Thank you very much. For the last slot in this round, I will turn to Ms. Demoff, and she has 5 minutes. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Chair. You had mentioned the RCMP straw purchases, and I'd like to go back, if I could, to the regulations in C71. When someone has come in to purchase a firearm and they have a license, the seller is calling the RCMP. Do our regulations require that the RCMP check to see that that is a valid license and make sure that it's not counterfeit?
Yes, it is, and I'll pass it to Kelly to expand on that.
So currently, restricted and prohibited firearms do require that validation of a license. And through C71, as you've identified, for the non-restricted firearms, it would be a requirement to have a valid license, and the registrar would validate that.
Okay, I recognize it's required to have the license. My question was just, is the RCMP required to validate the license?
Yes.
Okay, and so you're required to validate the license. Are there any other things that you do when you're, before you pass on the number to the seller? Or is it just strictly a license verification?
It's a license verification.
Okay. I wanted to switch gears a little bit. And again, I want to direct this to the RCMP. We know that people are not born criminals. And we've talked a lot about enforcement, but we haven't talked a lot about the prevention piece. And we're going to hear from other organizations that are doing a lot of work on that. As one of them said to me, if there's no young men joining gangs, there are no gangs. And we're also going to hear from a woman who was a gun runner in one of the gangs. And I think I'm just wondering, you know, you mentioned human trafficking and we've talked about drugs, but are you seeing younger people being drawn into gangs? And as a result, you know, when we're seeing 13-year-olds being used in gangs, and also women being used. So basically some of the most vulnerable people being drawn into gangs. I'm just wondering if you could comment on that a little.
Yeah, I guess, you know, my my first comment would be, I think there's always been vulnerable people being drawn into the gang lifestyle. I don't have specific stats with regards to ages or gender, and I'm sure it varies across the country. I guess, you know, what I would say, and it's been sort of alluded to here today, is, you know, there is no one size fits all approach to addressing the gun violence and gangs that we've been talking about here today. You know, whether it be, you know, lower level street gangs or more sophisticated organized crime groups, it does require a whole of society approach. You know, it's going to start with education and prevention early on to ensure that we, you know, address root causes which lead people to join gangs in the first place. And then it's all about, you know, as well having exit strategies for people in those lifestyles and leading them towards a healthier lifestyle. And then there is and with that as well does go a very robust law enforcement role as well. And, you know, Mr. Sauvé talked about it earlier, the Surrey Gang Prevention Initiative. And I think that is a perfect example of a lot of the things we need to be doing. And, you know, their initiative, Gang Intervention and Exiting Team. And that's really, you know, a team that consists of police officers, civilian case managers who, you know, they provide outreach, safety, planning, and resources in a non-judgmental manner to people who have and are involved in gang activity. You know, they provide counseling, life coaching, education, employment programming, mental health supports if it's required. And, you know, that program, just to finish off, I think, you know, in the few years that it's been in existence, I think they've had 23 successful individuals who have exited the gang lifestyle. So I think that's a good start for that program, and I see a lot more opportunities for similar initiatives across the country.
Mr. Sauvé, I only have 45 seconds left, but perhaps could you comment a little bit on that program? And my sense is that the resources across the country to expand that program are sorely lacking for people who want to exit gangs. But I wonder if you could just comment on that briefly.
I would agree with you. Resources are sorely lacking, and it's really part of a broader discussion. You know, we're talking here about Canada's social safety network, the police being the last resource, the last first responder standing. So we should be having a discussion about how big a social safety network do we want, and who's going to fund that, and how are we going to ensure those funds are appropriately placed, and that there's an actual success program in place. That's where the Surrey End Gang Life and CFSCU's End Gang Life program is successful. They measure it.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. We now move into the next round of questions and a 5-minute slot to be led off by Ms. Dancho. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask Mr. Sauvé some questions, a few things that you have mentioned. You had touched on in your opening remarks and just a few minutes ago that police resources are very strapped, and you're concerned that a few of the measures put forth by the government will further strap the already limited police resources. And of course, you represent 20,000 RCMP officers. So can you shed a little bit more light on the impact to our already strapped RCMP officers and regarding the buyback proposal and the potential provincial handgun ban? What impact will that have on police ability to do their jobs and combat gang violence, drug smuggling, gun smuggling, and the like?
No, thank you for the question. It's a really good one, and I don't think you would speak to any police association leader out there today that talks about having adequate resources, whether it's Vancouver, Calgary, the OPP. Recently, the OPP published a report where they were 1,000 officers short. So it's not unique to the RCMP, and you got to make that very, very clear here. And part of it has to do with improving the luster of a career in policing and public safety, whether it's from the RCMP or any municipal police jurisdiction. When I speak about adding resources, a lot of it has to do with looking at the current state of affairs in the RCMP. And if you look at our budget submissions, the third one upcoming, COVID has had an impact on our recruitment and our graduation of recruits, right? We only graduated 16 troops in fiscal year 2020-21 when we were supposed to graduate 40, a lot of because of shutting down for COVID and then a staged reopening of depot in Regina. That has led to almost a 1,200 member deficit across Canada. When you talk about 20,000 police officers in our bargaining unit, we're talking about 5% right there, not talking about hard vacancies or soft vacancies for family-related leave or daily injuries. So and then add in the buyback program. Who's going to go and pick up those guns after they've been sold back to the government? It's going to be your police of jurisdiction. Do we have the resources to increase that mandate and do that? I don't think we do. So it's a challenge.
Understood. And you also mentioned in your opening remarks, you had just briefly touched on, I think it was your third pillar, specifically about gang violence and criminality as the main causes of gun violence in Canada. And you'd mentioned sentencing will help address gang and gun violence. Can you just elaborate on what you meant?
Well, I think strong sentencing, which goes to challenges that we have within Canada's legal system, and the appearance, if you will, of a revolving door, whether that comes from a lack of pretrial custody beds, whether that comes from a lack of Crown counsels being able to do efficient JJP hearings, or whether it comes from a lack of provincial court or federal court judges, I don't know. But the appearance to a lot of people that reach out to us and speak to our members is that there is a bit of a revolving door. So are we talking about pretrial custody, or are we talking about mandatory minimum sentencings at the end, and the discretion for provincial court judges or appellate court judges to be able to impose those is a deterrent? But to commit a crime on a Friday and be out on a Saturday morning to commit the same crime Saturday afternoon is what the Canadian public, I think, are seeing. And how do we, in part, change within that system?
So recently, the Liberal government has brought forward Bill C-5, which addresses, as you mentioned, mandatory minimum sentences. So for those who don't know what that means, a mandatory minimum means if you commit X crime, you go to jail for a minimum of X amount of years or days or months. So that's what a mandatory minimum sentence is, from my understanding. So you're saying that you're already right now, without this bill C5, which will eliminate mandatory minimum prison time for extortion with a firearm, robbery with a firearm, firing a firearm with intent to injure someone. That's eliminating the mandatory minimums for those crimes. You're saying even without the elimination of those mandatory minimums with gun crimes, the RCMP are seeing now revolving door of violent crime committed Friday. Like you said, they're back out on the street committing crimes 2 days later.
I think if you were to ask the average Canadian, and we are hearing this a lot in our tours in Alberta, looking at the Alberta Provincial Police Services with respect to rural crime, a lot of Albertans are actually seeing that. We need to fix our legal system, however that looks, versus talking about different areas. And part of that legal system may be charge diversion. It may be early intervention. It might be more restorative justice. It might be more healing circles. It might be more spaces in elementary schools and high schools and more career and vocational training. All of that is part of that discussion about the big Canadian social safety network versus relying on the police just to solve the problem.
Right,
Thank you, Mr. Sauvé.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sauvé.
Okay. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Zuberi, who will have 5 minutes, please.
Again, I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. We're running 2.5 hours, and I know we haven't yet had a bathroom break, but we only have half an hour more left to go. I wanted to touch base in terms of for the RCMP. If you can please elaborate if there are any gaps when it comes to laying charges against gangs in legislation that you see right now. If you'd like to speak to that point.
No, I guess from my perspective, in terms of laying charges, not that I'm aware of, we have a full slate of offenses related to firearms. In terms of street gangs and organized crime, we have organized crime offenses that can apply equally to to both of them, gangs and organized crime groups. So I think we have a fairly comprehensive suite of offenses that are available to us.
And how about when it comes to prevention? Would you like to speak to that point too?
Yeah, prevention, like I mentioned earlier in my last intervention, need a lot of education, a lot of awareness, a lot of working with community groups, and back to the CFSEU program that they are leading, working with a lot of community groups to try to both prevent individuals from joining gangs, and if they have joined gangs, providing very robust and comprehensive exit strategies and working very closely with those individuals to help them exit the gang lifestyle.
I would say that's extremely important. It's not just the hard stick, but also getting pathways so that people can exit lifestyles that are not productive in society.
Extremely important. Extremely important.
And on that point, when it comes to mandatory minimums, how does that impact or not potentially impact or not be helpful when it comes to dealing with the issues we're talking about, gun violence and arms trafficking, illegal arms trafficking?
Yeah, I guess what I would say on that is, in terms of a comprehensive criminal justice system, whether it's dealing with firearms, organized crime, or gangs, I mean, law enforcement, enforcing laws are a very big part of that. But equally is the the full continuum of Canada's justice system, and we as law enforcement have to have confidence that the sentencing decisions they rest appropriately with our courts and judicial officials.
And I'd like to open up the floor to the panelists. If there's any novel points that you haven't yet raised thus far, if you'd like to raise them.
I would like to just add, if we have the time, and we touched on it briefly earlier, the work of our forensic labs and the ability to match cartridge casings in criminal activity. Equally, the ability to match a firearm in one crime scene to a firearm in another crime scene. And with regards to gang activity, for example, where firearms are probably often involved in multiple firearms-related incidents, having that technology and the ability to do that, and there's two key pieces to that. One is the IBIS, Integrated Ballistics Information System, which we have a limited number of systems across the country, as those are the frontline systems that are able to upload those cartridges into the Canadian Ballistics Identification System, which enables us to, search across the country, and also enables us to work with our counterparts in the U.S. to possibly do traces and matches of cartridges and firearms in the U.S. as well. So we're hoping to move forward to increase the number of those systems across the country. The larger network we have across the country, the easier it's going to be for police services to enter those items into a system locally and upload it into the national system. So that's something we're working on, and we're hoping we'll be able to make good progress with that as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. White. And I'd just like to conclude by saying thank you to Mr. Weber, Mr. Sauvé for being here, and Deputy Commissioner White and all others, Mr. Harris. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now I'll turn to Ms. Michaud for 2.5 minutes. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put a question to Mr. Sauvé, and I want to say that I have immense respect for all RCMP officers and officers of other police officers. We see this on Parliament Hill this week. Everybody's very professional, so I have great respect for the work that's done. We're trying to see what the solutions are from your standpoint and what should be done more. And we hope that, we'll take into account your very interesting proposals, more prevention, more resources. The national program about firearms traffic, could you give us a little more detail and tell us how prevention could help too?
No, merci.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I was prepared for this today in English, so all my answers will be in English.
Of the French language, I will answer in English. But the idea behind a national operational investigative program for firearms in Canada is to coordinate. So whether you're talking about prevention programs or whether you're talking about enforcement programs or whether you're talking about community programs, we don't have in Canada yet anyone who is coordinating all of that. Whether it's the Canadian Firearms Program, there's very little coordination of everything. As I mentioned earlier, there's no requirement right now for a municipal or provincial or even the RCMP detachment to send guns for tracing unless you need to use it as evidence in court. So do we need to change how we approach that and how we look at it? And the example might not have come across properly, but for example, I've been to a number of files where an estate is being settled. Person X dies and they find they have 3 firearms. They're not registered. There's no requirement on me, the police officer, to send them for tracing to find out if they were used in crimes. I can send them for destruction. So different things like that. As far as outreach goes, I think Canada, we need to get better. We need, as Canadians, to really get better about taking the luster off a life of crime. And what does that mean? It could be something as simple as violence in video games. I don't know, but does that have an impact on our children and how we bring them up? So a lot of things we can do better, and we really need to look at the broad picture.
Thank you very much. Then I will move to Mr. McGregor. The floor is yours for 2.5 minutes. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my question is for the RCMP, and I'm not sure which member would be best suited to answer the question. We have touched on occasion during today's meeting on the links between firearms trade and the drug trade as well. And You know, we know the opioids crisis is leaving a wake of carnage for so many families. In fact, in my home province of British Columbia, the life expectancy actually decreased because of the number of people who are dying from a toxic street supply of drugs. Maybe the RCMP, can you just touch on, you know, what has the introduction of fentanyl and carfentanil done to the drug trade, and how has, like, what have the effects been on that, on the people who are trafficking in drugs, and has it impacted their need for firearms? Is there a marked increase for turf, where they are trying to control ports of entry, places where it's being distributed, and so on? Can you touch on that link a little bit more?
Yeah, no, thank you for your question. And, you know, I would say, you know, traditionally with regards to gangs, organized crime being involved in, you know, drug trafficking, you know, that has always led to obviously accompanying firearms. So with regards to the transition to, you know, just use fentanyl and methamphetamine, for example, there are huge markets right now, you know, in Canada for those drugs. There continues to be a huge market for cocaine, which has always been more of a, you know, a staple for organized crime groups in terms of drugs importing and distributing in Canada. But as I mentioned earlier, we've seen a big transition from organized crime groups, a lot of them, moving into the fentanyl market and moving into the methamphetamine market. I think, as I mentioned, CISC public report that just recently came out, they identified was, you know, in excess of 250 organized crime groups across the country who have transitioned, now moving involved in the fentanyl market, and over 300 organized crime groups transitioned and now, you know, heavily involved in the methamphetamine market. So it's a big market that's there, and, you know, whatever the drug is, whether it's cocaine or fentanyl or meth, if the demand is there, you are going to get groups who are moving into it, both gangs and organized crime, and with that comes competition between gangs and organized crime. So obviously that does foster, you know, potentially increase violence.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Lloyd, over to you for a 5-minute slot, please, whenever you're ready.
Mr. Chair, I think I'm taking this next time slot.
All right.
So thank you. Thank you for all the very good, useful evidence that we've received so far. There's been a line of questioning about the source of firearms used in crime. And I'm concerned about how good this data is, how good our tracing tools are, and whether it's even mandatory for police forces across the country to submit firearms used in crime to tracing to discover the source of them. So I understand that that is not a mandatory requirement. So Mr. Sauvé, probably over to you. In your evidence, you told us about the concept of developing a national operational investigation program. How do you think that additional tool could be useful for us to get better data about the source of guns used in crime?
I think, and I realize that this could be considered ironic because, you know, here you have a labor union that's asking for more members. But, you know, I think one of the challenges that we see in gun crime in Canada is actual coordination. And as an evidence-based union, we try to bring forth positions that are based in evidence and all the data that we've been able to collate. It's challenging putting it all together. So being able to have a coordinated center, and I understand the idea has been studied a little bit from the RCMP from that perspective, but it's never materialized, to be able to coordinate efforts from integrated border enforcement teams, national weapons enforcement support teams, the Canadian Firearms Program, the chief armorers, all of those to bring us some data so that policymakers such as yourselves will have one source to be able to make best decisions from as you move forward. What's worked? What hasn't worked? Where should we devote more funding? Where should we devote more outreach? Those types of things, I think, is what we need to look at from an NOIP perspective.
Good, thank you for that. Do you have any comments about the suggestion that that police services across the country should be mandated to submit firearms that they seize for tracing. That it's not just voluntary, that it's not just to investigate that one particular crime, but just for data keeping purposes.
I think that would be a best practice. Before firearms perhaps are sent for destruction, that they should be recorded. They should be not necessarily traced, but perhaps recorded and test fired and all of that great stuff. So and I realize also now I'm just making a suggestion that we're increasing the mandate of the Canadian Firearms Program. So in concert with that, I'd say you'd have to increase the resources allotted to the Canadian Firearms Program in order to meet that mandate. But yes, I think it would be a best practice.
Good. Thank you. I'm going to pivot over to Mr. Weber. You gave us a lot of very useful information and data about the operation of border securities and the cooperation between the RCMP and the CBSA. Could you expand on that a bit and perhaps also reference the cooperation, levels of cooperation between CBSA and the American Homeland Security?
So I think some of those questions would be best directed at the CBSA, but I can answer some of that. I do know that there is coordination. We have our integrated border task teams, our IBET teams that do work together and do some work on patrolling the borders between ports. From our side, our members are seeing very little ability to participate in much that has anything to do with outside of our specific ports of entry, which is really one of the things that we'd like to see addressed, to have that increased participation outside of the port.
Right, maybe somebody from CBSA could jump in on that as well. Level of cooperation between CBSA and the RCMP and also Homeland Security.
Thank you. Yeah, I can speak to that. We have an excellent working relationship with both agencies, as well as other related partners, as I mentioned earlier, ATF, CBP, local police of jurisdiction in various parts of this country, and on the other side of the border. And as was just mentioned, we have our integrated border enforcement teams. We have a number of our resources, not just the individuals working at ports of entry, but also our intelligence staff and others that are involved in these teams. And again, to ensure that we are sharing information, but also where we can to coordinate on enforcement activities, so that we leverage that intelligence to produce meaningful outcomes. We do a number of referrals every year to police partners on both sides of the border that have led to investigation actions that are away from the port of entry. So we often talk about the number of seizures that we have, but CBSA plays a significant assisting role in terms of stimulating follow through that leads to investigations and arrests and seizures inland. And a number of those have been profiled in media releases. Operation Santo has mentioned a number of times, but I would say there have been operations like that in every region across Canada as a result of those partnerships.
Thank you. Chair, do I have any time left?
Nope, you're just right.
All right, that's what I thought.
Okay, then I would now like to ask Mr. Noor Mohammed to take the floor. He has 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, Deputy Commissioner White, I guess I understand from a previous study that Crown prosecutors have not always prosecuted charges that are laid on reserve. Can you share your experience with this and if you have any recommendations around that?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of specific insights on that. I think what I can say is right across the country, we work with, in terms of prevention and depending on the circumstances of the, investigation and individuals who are charged, the nature of the circumstances why they are charged, that we look for other alternatives to resolve the situation beyond prosecuting criminal charges. So that's something we've always worked with, and when the right opportunity and the right circumstances are there for us to work together with prosecutors to look at a very effective resolution without proceeding to criminal charges and prosecution. But it all depends, like I say, on the nature of the circumstances of the incident and the individuals involved.
Thank you. And if I just might switch to Mr. Sauvé, you spoke a lot about the impact of community outreach, of healing circles, restorative justice, education and opportunity is a great way to prevent a lot of the crime that we've been seeing, and particularly gun crime. Can you share a little bit about the positive impact, or the impact generally, that your members have seen when these programs have worked, when these programs are well funded, and your views on the type of positive impact this can have in communities?
Well, thank you. It's rarely spoken about in law enforcement public proceedings is that, our members serve in some of the most isolated posts in Canada. Sometimes they are the only representative of the government of Canada in those communities. And even in larger centers, the Burnabys or the Red Deers or the Fort McMurrays, these programs can be life-changing for those impacted, and it can create a lifelong bond between a public safety professional, whether it's a member of the RCMP or the Calgary Police, and that affected person. It changes the image of public safety and policing for that person, which is an important aspect for all police services and even public safety agencies in Canada if we want to address the recruiting crisis that everyone is seeing. We have to put some shine back on those buttons in those uniforms. How do we do that?
Thanks very much. And if I might go back to Deputy Commissioner White, then, having heard this from Mr. Sauvé, when you think about the role that the RCMP and law enforcement broadly, the agencies can play broadly in increasing engagement with communities to work on prevention, particularly around the use of firearms and some of the crimes that we've been seeing, what would you say are the major areas of opportunity that lie within law enforcement agencies, particularly the RCMP?
Yeah, what I would say, and I think everyone's aware of that, RCMP's police jurisdiction, across, good part of Canada actually, including all provinces except Ontario and Quebec, all territories, 155 municipalities, and approximately 600 Indigenous communities, as well as the contracted police of jurisdiction. So in all those areas, all of them, we work very closely with our municipal, provincial, territorial policing partners and community partners. And, to add on to what Mr. Sauvé said, very, very good insights, whether it's restorative justice or other programs, we're fully supportive of that, coming up with the right and the best solution for everyone involved, especially the individuals who are, involved in a criminal activity, the victims, and the communities. And we try very hard through a number of means to get the right balance for everybody, because it is about looking after the individuals in those communities right across the country. And we have a big role in making sure we come up with the right solutions and right resolutions.
Thanks very much. Mr. Chair, how am I doing for time?
30 seconds.
Okay, I will donate that time back to the cause, just to say thank you very much to all the witnesses who have spent great time with us and I think really helped expand our understanding. Thank you.
Colleagues, we are 12 minutes before the top of the hour. We can proceed in one of at least two ways. One would be to say that this has been an excellent conversation and adjourn the meeting now. The other is I could divide the remaining time and give each party another 2 minutes. I'm in your hands. Do we have a consensus that we can adjourn the meeting now? Let me just see. Or do you want the extra? No, that's a couple of thumbs up. Who would prefer we continue? Okay. In that case, it's left to me to thank the witnesses so very much. You have been very generous with your time. And it's clear to all of us on this committee that you live your lives immersed in these issues. You can see it from every angle. You are living what it is for many Canadians, a very, very tough life and a tough job. And it's up to us as policymakers and legislators and decision makers to give you the best tools we can give the country in order to combat gun violence and street violence. especially young people who find themselves in these gangs, and to treat this issue with the seriousness that it demands and that has been present during these 3 hours of questions and answers and presentations by all of you. So on behalf of the committee representing the House of Commons, I thank you for the work you do for our country. I thank you for the generosity of your time this morning. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. See you all on Thursday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members.
Thank you.